Eric.
Omar.
So I can address this controversy very quickly and we can move on. And that is, we got over the hump known as Waterworld. We insulted Kevin Costner, who's a dear listener, not friend of Iron Culture, where he said, my filmography stands up with the best of them. Bogey, like Humphrey Bogart, Paul Newman, the Newmanator. And then there's me. Tin Cup, it's right there. There's Casablanca. Everyone remembers the last line of Casablanca, and everyone remembers the last line of Tin Cup, right? So anyways, we got over that hump, and then I did misspeak because we're just in the middle of it. And not by misspeak, I mean, I did get a few things confused where I was mentioning Peter Weller. We spoke about RoboCop. And I mentioned this little-known sci-fi horror film, this gem that's not a gem, called Leviathan. And I did say the director of Empire Strikes Back, Ivan Kershner, directed it. So here's the connection, because I looked it up after. So I did look it up after.
So you felt that bad about being 1 for 4?
It was like, what do they call? Oh man, I forget what the line is called in baseball, but there's a certain threshold that you're shit at bat, and they won't let you basically be at bat anymore.
Just guess what the line is. I'm sure you'll get it right.
the Menendez line. I looked it up. He directed RoboCop 2 with Peter Weller. So he directed a Peter Weller vehicle, but it was the second RoboCop, which is totally not as good as the first one, but still is a good film. Did you watch the second one?
Yeah, isn't that the one where does he have to fight the mech?
Yes.
Okay,
the mech that's integrated with a human brain.
Yeah, because the first time it's just they're just trying to replace RoboCop, so there's no human element, and they just want the mech drones. And then the second one, they put the human brain in it, and I think doesn't he end up like punching through it and like punching the brain or getting the classic
100%. And Frank Miller of Dark Knight Returns, he was the scriptwriter and he is in it for a little bit. But those are the two. Do not watch Leviathan. Maybe consider watching RoboCop 2. We're done with the controversy. But there was a comment, Eric, and I want you to react to this from the last one, because now that we mention that we read YouTube comments, the flavor on them, really good. There's some spice. So there's some reviews we'll read quickly. We'll get to the topic. Sit back, relax. We have timestamps. Shout out to Kai. Like, we have leveled up the overall timestamp game. So I feel good taking their time. But anyways, Eric, so people said a variety of things. We're talking about peaking. We're going to talk about Christopher Bearcat in a second. But someone did say this, because they had to mention what were they? Never our friends, always our enemy. I really forget what our position has been, but nonetheless, it's always been that. And the person said, Jay is the username, looks like Omar realized views skyrocket when he gets undressed. Say what you will about the Macro Factor app podcast, at least they're a wholesome family values business that don't sell their bodies on the internet. Honestly, the amount of skin shown here is disgusting. I thought this was a house of learned doctors. Next time, Omar should at least wear his hair down to cover up more.
That is the downside of having long hair, is people can't see quite as much of your juicy traps and shoulders. And it's kind of the, say what you will about the Macro Factor podcast. You can only expect so much out of a corporate front that is an extended ad. And I think in the category that they hold by themselves of an evidence-based commercial, I think they do a great job. So in that category, you got to give them some props, and they have always been staunchly, anti-marijuana and pro-family values. But I think this speaks to a much deeper issue, what he's bringing up, and this has gone back to time immemorial when we're talking about like Fabio cover models on romance novels. They need to have long hair, but they also have to have broad shoulders and big traps and big delts. So I don't think this is one we've solved quite yet, folks. No. Is how do you balance having luscious locks while also having 3D delts? And it's probably one of the biggest aesthetic crises facing men with long hair. It's only a close second to blueberry arms. So I think we really need to start just kind of digging into these more important topics on Iron Culture, even though they might offend some of our more family value oriented listeners. I can understand. It's a tough line to walk.
Eric, there's so much. I'm going to go on because I do want to get to our man, Christopher Bearcat. Thank you for that. Because speaking of unfettered corporate capitalism in Macrofactor, there was a review, 5 out of 5, right? Thank you for that. Caxed Bob is the name. Thanks a lot is the title. I began to listen to Iron Culture a few weeks ago, and my data minutes went through the roof. I had to change my data plan to unlimited. I'm not a rich man, and I'm having to refinance my house just so I can listen to your podcast. Thanks a lot.
Hey, what I hope is that you get a better insurance rating out of that. And that may be challenging in the current economic environment. But best of luck with the refi. Always a good decision. Hopefully you get cash back from the bank, and you can invest that in a, better phone to watch us in 4K, which we don't record in, but you can still change the setting and use more data. So just helping you level up every step of the way.
More consumption is always a good thing. And if I could just remind Cax Bob of one, tiny tidbit of information, is that the sole function of an individual in an economic society is to maximize personal wealth. So really, we're just enabling you to reach your higher self, not financially, because it sounds like you're doing terrible, but just that encroaching financial ruin will hopefully inspire you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
And also counterpoint, Omar, you got to spend money to make money.
This is true. That's been our philosophy with Iron Culture.
Yep. Spend money and it will come. It's basically the field of cream. So yeah.
Did Eric just relate it all the way back to Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams? This guy is good. Eric, see, this is why I do, because I know this man can not only hang, but knock it out of that proverbial park. And now I do want to give a shout out to Machiavelli Kevin. That is his name. Phenomenal podcast. It's a straightforward review, and we do appreciate when people read them. Even the one, like we read the 1 stars, the 3 stars, but these are the 2 most recent ones. It's 5 out of 5. Phenomenal podcast. It's great. It's a great listen while I'm working. I enjoy the charisma by both hosts. I've watched Omar's and Eric's stuff for a while on YouTube. Glad I found this podcast. Awesome content. Just a nice, wholesome, family-oriented review.
Omar, I think we're probably getting more of these straightforward podcasts because we're making clear connections between our banter and quote-unquote nonsense, which is obviously not nonsense at the beginning. Like, I would point out that with great foresight, we spent 2 episodes talking about Waterworld before we then had a scientific episode specifically about water. So, it doesn't get better than that, folks. We've got a team of writers in the back room. They're communicating to us in real time, just like they're the general manager and we're the quarterback, and we're just running plays. I think that's the way sports work, and we're killing it. So you're welcome.
Yeah, we shot that wrister, and then we did the hoop, and it went through the net, and it is a grand slam.
Yep.
So Eric, now right before we get to the topic, because also this is what's so good about the banter, what people might be unaware of if they've never done improv or they've never played live music, is that's why a little jam before you go on. It helps you warm up to get to the real topic. But I want to give a shout out to actually Christopher Bearcat. Speaking about the real topic from last week's episode, he left the comment. Eric, I don't know if you want to just read that and then just kind of discuss it, because I think there could be something there potentially for us, only because you did a very thorough analysis. It's very interesting to me, that episode in the first place, just because you've advocated either certain position or presented the topic as such that I think our listeners have a certain perspective, and if they didn't exist, if they're not like a 90s bodybuilder or they're not familiar with another side or different viewpoints, it may have been surprising to find out that there is in fact a much more contested position when it comes to kind of peaking overall, depending upon what part of the space you're in.
No. So big thanks to Christopher Bearcat. He reposted and said, awesome podcast episode from Helms 3DMJ and Omar Isuf. Eric makes excellent points that challenges a lot of traditional peaking zeitgeist. Great use of the word, by the way, and shares his thoughts from our case study data. Also, then he started to share a few stories from some of his peak week pictures of his clients to demonstrate some common changes and help illustrate what some of the common terms used actually look like. And he actually does use, one thing that I think is important to understand is that you can take many pathways to Rome. And I don't want to go too far on this because he showed some really cool pictures where he used kind of this quote unquote spill and fill approach, where he spilled the client over purposely with a very high carb intake and then tapered water a little bit, tapered carbs. And they compared to the peak of their spill to when they were looking a lot drier, quote unquote, they look tremendously better. And I would not be surprised if, obviously at the very least, subcutaneous water was lower because they actually purposely spilled over. So I don't want it to be taken as this kind of hardline stance from the prior episode of there's never a time for anyone who's drug-free to ever do anything that might look like drying out. Like if the procedures you use previously do result in, water retention, then there might be some type of rationale for that. And certainly if you spill over, you can be reasonably sure that you've filled up carbohydrate. So, whether or not you actually just need to, go to bed and eat slightly less carbs or do something more intentional, it's going to be individual and based upon the timeline and how far you push it. But anyway, I think that was just some great examples. But it's also important, and one thing I messaged Chris about was, ideally, we also should have pictures before you even spilled them over to make sure we're not just, doing a whole bunch of things just to get back to where we were, before peak week even happened, to make sure all these efforts are actually resulting in a net improvement in appearance. But, the tough thing about that, Omar, to get those kind of pictures where it's like before peak week, after the carb load and then on game day, is you're almost always going to be comparing pictures taken in your living room to pictures without tan in a hotel room to pictures with tan in a hotel room. So it's just really challenging to make fair comparisons. But anyway, that's why we're hopefully going to get more data on this in the future, and going to drop a little hint that we might have Chris and some of his colleagues and some of my colleagues now actually on the podcast to have deeper discussions about this. So yeah, is water wet? Tune in to find out.
Breaking news. No, Eric, we've really leveled up in that we didn't notify Chris beforehand that we're doing that episode. We made him respond to us. We know he, in fact, unlike Joe Sullivan, is listening to this episode. And then he shouts us out, thereby enabling us to create more content. So we basically took inspiration from call-out channels where you don't check beforehand with the person. You mention them, and then, of course, they're forced to respond. And then you have more content. So I really like this new approach of just calling people out.
Yeah, it's not necessarily hacking reciprocity in the traditional sense. It's more like, hacking antagonism and, groupthink and forced judgment by your peers. So yeah, maybe we can write a marketing book about it. I'm sure it's a great strategy that everyone appreciates.
No, and speaking of peaking, man, I think that is the nice segue to kind of the topic we're talking about here. And speaking about seminal, 80s films, 90s films, whenever Tin Cup came out, did it come out? Was it a VHS only release? Like, Eric, do you when you see a film after the fact and you're like, was this really playing in movie theater? Like, no, they didn't release this. I think that was Tin Cup.
It's possible. I don't remember Tin Cup, but I know I saw it.
That's what I mean.
And I'm pretty damn sure it was a mid-90s film, but I could be wrong.
I'm going to say 97. Let me be wrong, Eric. I just said 97. Let me be 1 for 4. Let me catch some zeros right now, man.
Oh, yeah. Is it a rom-com based around golf?
I know there's some. I'm gonna assume he's washed up because Kevin Costner always kind of looks washed up. So they had to write that into the character.
Oh yeah. A small town Texas golf player qualifies and enters the U.S. Open golf tournament. So first, it's the story of the unlikely hero.
Yep.
It's your Rudy.
Yep.
It's your Eddie the Eagle. Yep. It's your Rocky. Also, in order to win the respect and love of his rival's girlfriend. So it's a love triangle based around the unlikely golf hero. And here's what's surprising to me: 72% on Rotten Tomatoes.
No.
Yeah, that's right.
Eric, we're too busy focusing on the other classic, Happy Gilmore, which I think is a lot closer in terms of an adaptation of golf.
I would say it's the only golf film I've ever enjoyed.
There you go.
By far.
I'd go one step further and say there's not a single golf film I've enjoyed. There's one with Will Smith where he was like magical.
So hold on.
Happy Gilmore.
Are you saying you did not enjoy Happy Gilmore?
It's beyond golf. See, let me go there, Eric.
Okay, so you wouldn't classify it as a golf film.
Yeah.
It's golf, or not even golf adjacent. It's golf transcending. Is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Now I will say that
God, I just want to point out to the audience that for like 5 seconds, I thought I'd have to end Iron Culture and never talk to Omar again until he made it clear that Happy Gilmore transcended golf rather than it not being a good film. Okay, that was close.
We're back. The nuclear button, the finger was hovering there. Just like end Skype call, release own statement.
I had to give my key back to my assistant. You keep holding that. I'll close this box. Yeah, we're fine.
But speaking about seminal 80s films and the whole Rocky montage and the comeback story and everything else, I was talking to you a little bit off air, man. Just the feeling and it's the beginning is a very delicate time here, and I'm in the middle of it, of let's say a potential transformation that's occurring where there's almost a revival, in terms of my desire to make content, participate in the space, but more, if I want to be very particular with what I'm talking about here, more my personal journey of lifting, that I think with a lot of different people, they could probably relate to that the pandemic has afforded the opportunity for, introspection, some self-reflection, and a variety of different things. It presented to everyone, like we spoke about that 2 years ago, but I can say this safely, and I always like to do things retrospectively just because you never know, Eric, and if anything, with the pandemic, the last 2 years with the volatility, it's taught us not to plan too far ahead in the future, so we'll see how it goes. But I have some genuine enthusiasm for the space and for my overall lifting that I haven't had in a while. And that I'd say that's like the beginning.
No, I love to hear it. And I'm glad you didn't bring this up earlier, because people would have thought like, oh, maybe Omar Isuf is going to just catch the edge of that cliff before he becomes completely irrelevant. But that occurred like in 2020.
Yes.
So to then if we'd made this podcast, earlier in the history of Iron Culture, it would have been a little cringe later, because it would have been clear that you missed that cliff.
Yes.
And fell.
Yep.
Hit the edge of another cliff and then fell off again. And now we're up to the present. But I think but in all seriousness, I think it is an interesting thing when you're someone who is deeply connected to lifting weights. You love it personally, and you're also deriving income. And whether you sought it out or not, you also have a certain notoriety and a perception online that even people like yourself, who I think has done a fantastic job of separating how people see you versus your personal life, but also keeping who you are on camera the same as how you are in person, which I can tell everybody they're not different, which is amazing. And I was so pleased when I first met you. And also still finding motivation and not letting the two interfere with one another. I think the model of how you do that, people have taken different paths. Like I was reflecting on like when YouTube fitness first took off, like 10 years ago, it was, I'm going to be completely quote unquote transparent and just film everything.
Yeah.
And that is one way to do it, but there's zero separation. And then it's hard not to let your own emotions and decisions not become performative. And then you have to ask yourself, but am I really doing this for me and the reasons I want to? So yeah, I'm always really interested to hear you talk about this specifically, because I think unfortunately you're an outlier in this way, because I think you actually have a very healthy separation in some ways that a lot of people don't know how to do. And I think you talking about that and what it's like is probably a very positive thing for anyone who does want to make content and have a little more public view into their personal fitness journeys.
Eric, you're too damn kind, man. And let me just say, the secret here that we both know is just to outlast everyone, and just to enter the time. So we decided to participate, or I'll start with myself, social media before you can actually generate an income from it. So is it the fact that I had that necessary separation by choice, or was it actually placed upon me? Because I would say the kids these days, it's a lot tougher once you see that there are certain mechanisms that you can utilize in order to garner a following over time. So you get like hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, like, so on and so forth. And it becomes harder to differentiate between the two, between you doing this for yourself or some aspect of yourself, because I think we are multifaceted individuals and you don't have to have this, clear demarcation. I think we're complex beings. But I think that once, as you said in another episode, Eric, the person in the front driving and the person who's driving or the aspect of yourself that's driving takes over completely, that's when it can become dangerous. But I will say it is fortunate. Like I am like half joking, but I'm serious. Like, man, when I came up, and that's why Alan, so shout out to my buddy Alan Thrall, who has consistently put, and we've spoken about this, some of my from a personal standpoint in the space, some of my favorite content, because he's always been true to himself. There's always been a unique aspect to it, where his timing, I actually think he's low-key like a good actor, but also the comedic elements or how he shapes the overall content to present it to you has always been a tier above a lot of the other space, a lot of the other part. But I joked with him, we were sharing these stories, Eric, and this is part of it, just to talk the career side, but then I'll jump over to the actual lifting, that Alan was creating content, man, for like 4 years before he ever cracked, let's say, like, I forget his numbers, honestly, let's say 10,000 followers, but an amount that basically you have that aha moment of, okay, I'm actually crafting content for an audience. Because before that occurs, and there's some line that, once again, you cross, you're kind of just throwing out content for it to stick, but it's more for personal enjoyment. You do desire to grow a following, certainly, but there's not like people expecting you to create content. So you're not beholden to anyone. You're kind of just doing it. But for us, like, I think if you were to tell a modern person entering the space, oh yeah, it took 4 years before like anyone even took minor notice. Most people, I would say, if they don't make it now, if they're trying to enter the space within like a year or 2 years or whatever the short and truncated timeline would be, that they consider themselves and both themselves in the endeavor to be a failure. So there's an extra pressure, I would say. So we were kind of fortunate being at the inception that there wasn't that pressure, and I think that informed a lot of different choices. But just to talk about it very briefly, I think every kind of lifter, there's some through threads, some commonalities that everyone shares, and whether you're aware of it or not, and that's the power of being able to reflect on it. I think the first phase of every lifter's journey, and that's why I was joking about the whole Rocky, like Survivor song, is that you're lifting for yourself. You're trying to prove something to yourself and to others. You're trying to kind of stake your claim in a space, whether you're aware of it or not. Like, you're not aware these things are occurring, but it is very comparative by, just its nature. So you're lifting, you're curious what other people are doing, how you stack up. You're wondering if you could do these things too, because I think everyone has that idea when they first start lifting, man, wouldn't it be incredible to lift 2 plates? Wouldn't it be incredible to deadlift 3 plates? And there's desires and there's goals, but your competence isn't quite there. So it's a process of self-discovery. So I think the first phase everyone kind of shares, which is you're doing it for yourself, and the reasons why you're doing it for yourself could be, once again, multifaceted. So it's proving to yourself, to others, and it's gradually getting over that hump and discovering that you are more capable, that enables you then to take on bigger and bigger, tasks. And that's like the first part, and we could get back to that. But the second part that might not occur for a lot of people is either inevitably with that like roller coaster ride of lifting, where PRs come easy, you get kind of the respect of yourself and of your peers, like, oh man, you squatted 2 plates or 3 plates, that's awesome. Things start slowing down, and so something else changes for a lot of people. For myself, along the journey, and that's why I've kind of had a few different like revivals. Like 2012, I experienced the largest increase in my strength despite having lifted for a handful of years already, and that was change of environment and so on and so forth. But simultaneously, Eric, at the same time as my lifting was going well, my content started to take off. And I had been, lifting, creating content, working as a trainer, as we've spoken about, for over a handful of years then. By that point, I had been in the space probably, so 2009, I would say my channel took off more in 2013. I remember when I went down to Florida to do a class, I had like 80,000 followers. But anyways, the point is, the line that I crossed was that I slowly began deriving my income from the work I put out online, and by extension, me, who I was and what I was doing. Because let's face it, like, let's be honest, even like, I think you've done a fantastic job of this. Like, you're, in academia, and you present the information that people follow you because you're a credible source. I do think, not with you, but in the greater space, intrinsically tied to someone's following, it's kind of what they do as an authority figure, whether you want to be or not. But like, you could try and remove yourself, but even let's say those in the so-called evidence-based space, there's usually one of those calling cards. So either like they're strong, so they'll mention, so they'll have a how to squat, like, and this is no insult, like, but our boy, like, let's say Greg Knuckles, he's done a fantastic job, Stronger by Science, but he'll mention, you know, in his squat article, like, I've also squatted, not that he knows it's not necessary, but it's helpful. Or same idea, like, let's say you want to talk body recomposition and you're an author, you know, having a photo of yourself there will help with if you show you can do it. We know it's not necessary, it's not a qualification to be a good coach, but we're well aware of the reality that we're in. And so I would say, I'll stop right there, but I'll say the second phase began when I started deriving my income or my employment from what I did as a lifter.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that there are different, I'm going to use the word threats, but it's probably a little too aggressive for what I mean by it, but maybe perspective challenges at these different phases. Like in the initial phase, there is the quote unquote Dunning-Kruger effect, you know, where you're trying to make content, you're trying to be helpful, but you don't know what you don't know. Or maybe you're aware, but you still need to put yourself out there.
Yep.
And
yep.
I think an equally common mistake is that you're too paralyzed to actually do anything. So your content's too infrequent to ever catch hold, even though it might be good or correct. And it's just you're too negatively affected by criticism or the potential of criticism that it paralyzes you from putting anything out. And even when you kind of are able to stay in your lane and you avoid too much of the Dunning-Kruger effect, like, you know, you've said this many times, Omar, that, you know, you don't like to delete your old videos. You have made videos that you'd go back and you'd say something different. But I'd say for the most part, compared to most people, like the mistakes or the errors or the incorrect information you've put out are relatively rare and relatively innocuous. And people can understand in the context that it wasn't, maybe it was a little too general or sweeping, or maybe it was too specific applied too generally. But it's never like, wow, Omar used to be full of shit. You know, like that's not it. But there are people like that. And I think that early phase, I've mentioned one of the potential, perspective threats or challenges, or just, you know, ways to not be successful or get things a little wrong, is that, you know, not putting stuff out too frequently, being too afraid to put out content, or putting out content that's just incorrect and then kind of hurting your long-term chances of being credible. But when you're doing it, even when you're doing it right, I think what is almost inevitably going to happen is that you lack focus, that your content can feel very haphazard and a little all over the map. And then at the next phase, what you're talking about, when you can see the potential for income and you have enough experience, data, and just time interacting with your burgeoning audience, you understand what they're interested in, what things are getting rewarded as far as clicks, what things kind of resonate with your audience. And then also, if you're smart, what do you like to do? And where's the intersection between all of those things? And, you know, I think it's almost this phase where you start honing in on a certain aspect of yourself that happens to be the most interesting and has the most utility for being a vehicle of information to your audience. And I think the challenge at that point moving forward is not letting that subvert the complexity of who you actually are and all the reasons you're involved in it. And then even going further, you know, that blade can get even sharper, which makes your content, you know, more likely to, you know, hit. You're more likely to have these videos that succeed. But at the same time, I think it's very easy to lose what was the seed and then what became the tree. And forgetting that the seed of everything was that you genuinely love lifting and that you're creating content about it because it's an intrinsic part of your life. And then one day you look up and you're using like this, like you're going, oh, I should lift or do things with my own personal goals that are going to be interesting to my audience rather than the other way around. And I think that can really kind of, you know, take the gas out of your tank or the wind out of your sails, you know? So I think that's when as an outside observer, because I would say, you know, you use the term we a lot, but I actually don't really consider myself that same type of content producer that you are or that Alan Thrall is. And so I can observe these trends and I understand it a little bit, but at the same time, I haven't actually walked in your shoes in the same way. And I think it also evident of that is that we've never really tried to take the 3DMJ YouTube channel out of that first phase. It's kind of this collective of people who are all contributing to it. And like sometime in the next 2 years, we'll probably hit 100,000 subscribers, but we are at 94,000. So that tells you something about our growth rate. And like 4 years ago, we were at 80,000. So it's, I think people are, it's a lower likelihood that someone will come to our channel for the first time and gain traction. It kind of speaks to people as a accessory to knowing who we are already. But I think good YouTube channels, you come there, that's a landing page video. There are certain viral videos or videos they're well known for, things that are going to get linked to. And they're like, oh, that is interesting. I want to subscribe to that or like that or click on watch later. And with effort or more focus or being much more refined, we could achieve that. But at the same time, that's only a part of what we're about. So that's just not going to happen. So we haven't had to face those challenges in the same way. So it's really cool to hear your perspective.
No, Eric, I think something that you tapped into regarding the 3DMJ channel is something powerful that we both identify, and I think it's one of our tonics, is that your actual content, so the nature of what you're talking about on that channel wouldn't necessarily change. It's more how it's probably presented. So it'd be the fixings, it'd be the things outside of it, right? So it'd be the window dressing. It'd be like start, title, thumbnail, then it'd be like maybe brevity as an example. So let's say theoretically Alberto Nunez wants to talk on tapering, whatever. Instead of a 20-minute video, it's like, okay, we could chop this down, make it cleaner, make it tighter, make it 12 minutes, and we have like a flow that goes 1, 2, 3, 4. We make it 5 points of tapering that you might not be aware of, rather than tapering. What you need to know is the title. Cool. Now, fundamentally, those that tune into 3DMJ will be walking away with basically the exact same thing. One's willingness to click on one of those videos versus the others might be different, and that has downstream effects, as we understand. And I think one of the most liberating parts, that's why I joke, and as I joke with Jeff and whatnot about just doing our own culture, is that we have our audience, we do our thing, we post it. We're not beholden. Like we joke, so we do pay for this podcast, and we run it at a loss, but it's a passion project for us because it means we're not beholden to anyone. We don't have any sponsors. You don't have to think about things like, oh, like not should we actually never say anything that could land us in hot water. It's not that at all. But when you're beholden, right, when you're obligated, it's completely different. And even the topics that you want to talk about, when you inhabit that space where I think you have a growth mindset, so it's the idea of what do people want and what do people want to see, and then how can I tailor my content to match with that, it does become a dangerous game where eventually, the Rocky song, you trade your passion for glory. The idea here is that when you're posting, let's say you want to have a podcast episode or you want to have a YouTube video, and like getting shredded or the day, like it doesn't matter. Like the 5 steps of this, there are certain things that are going to do better than others, and it's to the detriment potentially of your audience being an educator that there are certain topics, or even from a personal interest standpoint, Eric, let's say for us, that you think, like, you might not think this is interesting, but I think once we present it to you, so again, it wouldn't get the click. And when we look at the weighted like average of a channel, that it always has to be like semi-relevant to keep growing. It's all these calculations outside of what you want to talk about and the actual subject that you're talking about, like the core, that I've always found personally like uninteresting. Like people call me, that's what they call me, like, with Rask going out like a marketer. It's like, I actually don't like to think about these things. I like to think about that which actually interests me in the first place. So launching off of that, man, as the channel began to grow, I obviously observed certain trends. That's what the guy gave the shout out about, like, being sure, like this is actually just because I came from training. And this is actually funny, the pink, I'll say the pink stringer that I'm wearing, Eric, side note here. I wore a pink stringer in 2013 for a photo. That's an infamous photo because I just had the top down, like, I'll put it this way, just as Jeff Nippert said.
You graduated to half natty. Bro. You were finally being accused.
Yes.
Either all of a sudden he started using anabolics that immediately gave him 5 years worth of gains.
Yeah.
Or perhaps there was slightly different lighting and he had a pump. It's probably the former, because we know how it works, folks. We know what they do.
They do. So it was incredible though, man, because there were a few things. So I was upping the production, not in we're talking 13 standards here, folks. Okay, it's still abysmal by 2022 standards. Like, what are you even doing? But anyways, there was that pink stringer photo where I did exactly as Eric said. I had a tan. So your boy, I had my melanin popping off. I had a pump going on, and I knew how to pose in front of the camera. And anyways, I went from being told that I was like too fat or like too skinny or whatever for you to, like, people click on, so they would see, whatever, another channel, like, let me make up what was like Steve Cook. It doesn't really matter, like some other person. And then they'd see my channel as like, who's this kid talking? Like, you need to put on, you need to lift more weight. And then when I would deadlift, so I deadlifted 500 pounds because like that's, or 545 in 2012, which at that time, like that's like a 700 deadlift in like 2012's era. So people would say, okay, you're strong, but you look like shit. And then I discovered the stringer look, and then they'd be like, yeah, but now you're enhanced. And that's why that infamous Natty or Not website, because I will say this, the person, and I'm reading between the lines. One, because I don't look exceptional. Let's just be blunt here. But two, I think because I think it was a he, probably respected the content. He wanted it. He gave me a 3 out of 5, a chance I was natural. Not he could never say 100% chance, but because the nature of the content and whatnot. But that was a tipping point, Eric. I say all that only because you could slowly see insidiously how it works. Where now your views, so your videos are performing better, the topics that are going to hit, your goals that are more likely to get people interested. And for myself, I would say this, the one thing I'm proud of, and maybe because I want this to be much more conversational than just like, a soliloquy one after the other, is that one of the things I am proud of is that I always was interested in terms of what the body can do. And finding strength training was liberating for me because it was fun. The numbers were objective. And so one of the things, it wasn't the fact that I chose, let's say, strength lifting, so the big 3 to get stronger. None of that was a problem in and of itself inherently. But one of the things I am proud of is that despite like the attention towards like the 3 out of 5 like a 3 out of 5 natty and all those other conversations and like this rise of aesthetics and like natural YouTubers participating, that we were able, and there's other channels like Candido's channel, whatnot, to kind of give a little shine to things outside of just looking good. And so the overall direction of things, it's not like I completely please, the thing I'm trying to say isn't that, oh my God, like I lost my way, I lost the passion. It's just that when you start doing what you're doing and now you're being compensated for it, and you're aware from that aspect, let's say you're interested in a multitude of things and you drive, fulfillment for a variety of different reasons. Now that mechanism of you earning money from it overshadows it all and then kind of informs your choices.
Yeah. Just as a minor aside, isn't it ironic that you had to look good enough to convince people to train for strength?
No, Eric, pause. That was it. So because this is the thing, because I'm plugged in, you read the comments. I really think this is where, like, having a trade or having an occupation that you spend like a decade in, you really do get to see the current, like the through thread of where the pulse of the people, where it is. And I saw that seismic shift, man. So one, when I started getting stronger, the people that didn't, in quotations, care about aesthetics, hell yeah, man, like go you, like that's awesome. And so you got that squad right on. But for the masses in general, they basically needed to be convinced, and the cultural shift, Eric, that occurred was that you can look good while getting stronger, or that getting stronger may help in terms of looking good. That was a seismic change that happened in the space.
100%. Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah. And it's, it's a funny thing. That necessity to have that credibility, especially that we operate in a space where that is not meant to be important, and sometimes even actively, at least we say we look down on it, like it's a appeal to authority equivalent, But I absolutely know that there are benefits to me having PhD after my name, or not that it's super impressive, but it's impressive enough to have credibility that I can, squat 500 or deadlift 570 or bench 350 or whatever. And that is, it's just a funny thing. Like, I don't know how much it would make a difference if you took 50 pounds off all those numbers, or if I had a master's instead of a PhD. But I do think everyone understands that those elements need to be there to some degree to show that you have a certain level of credibility. And I've always wondered about that, and I think that's one of the things that I actually struggle to know where to draw the line.
Yeah.
knowing that I'm seen as an expert and leveraging that. And is that always bad or is that always good? And it's, I think it is very almost case by case that I look at it.
Yeah.
And, I think the problem is when you let your own, like, if you buy into your own hype, quote unquote, like if you start to be like, well, I mean, I do have a PhD and I do know what I'm talking about. I studied this, so I don't need to put in text references. No one checks them anyway, that type of thing. And then you let yourself make less convincing arguments because you don't have to put a reference there. And you're saying it's because, the audience doesn't care, doesn't read them or whatever. But yeah, anyway, it's just those, I think it is that constant, like the topic of this to me is that constant blending of subverting your own personal checks and balances with those of the people around you.
Yeah.
And it is kind of tough, like to talk big picture culturally. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit here. You were talking about that kind of first phase, or like the Rocky story, where you're trying to prove something to yourself and to get yourself on the map in the people in the eyes of other people. That is the cultural rite of passage that exists in almost all societies.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it, and I think to some degree you can take the whole, you just should have intrinsic motivation, and so long as you love yourself and you're good, you can take that a little too far, because if you kind of really kind of go down that slippery slope on a snowboard, it arrives you at a place where you don't need anyone. Babies don't need parents. You don't need friends. You don't need a spouse. You're good on your own too. Like it's individualism and self-love taken to the point where you actually don't have human connection, right? And obviously that's not a good thing, nor is that an accurate representation of even the most introverted individuals. So it is tough, and I think rite of passages are important, and it's about being acknowledged by your peers and people who have a shared experience, and saying, yeah, you're one of us now. You have achieved something. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think there becomes a point when you can feed into either one of those a little too much at the wrong time. And it is a delicate and constant balancing act that I think you have to go through in life. And I think a lot of people who are not publicly visible, they don't have to get on that tightrope very often. They have to think about it when they go to family events, like, oh, wow, my family still sees me as when I lived with them 15 years ago, or I'm reverting back to me as a teenager. Or you go to, you go to your high school reunion and you find yourself acting like you're 18, or you get in these, relationship dynamics with people, at work or whatever, you fall into these patterns, and they have expectations of you meet them whether you like it or not sometimes, kind of deal. And yeah, you navigate that, but most of your life you're sitting there in your own skin with people who see you every day, and ideally, if it's a healthy relationship, you're all growing together. But I think, and of course that's, ideally, of course, but I think when you are even a semi-public figure and you disclose almost anything about your personal life or your motivations and what makes you tick and who you are, which is unavoidable. Even the people who have the largest separation, like, oh, that's the expert they bring on X channel. You're at least known as the expert they bring on X channel, and that is the role you're playing. And I think being acknowledged for that role is being acknowledged for a very small slice of who you actually are. And that can subvert your own self-perception, whether you want it to or not. And I think you do have to constantly reflect on that so that you don't find yourself one day not really identifying with the person you're being in the public eye. So it's an interesting thing, man.
Eric, so much to talk about, because no one wants to be the thermometer in the room just taking the temperature, which inevitably, if you're once again just looking at all these metrics and you're looking at the feedback, you become the avatar of their experience of understanding something. So you're like, oh, you're that guy, so you're the natural guy that like is pretty strong, pretty aesthetic, has good knowledge, like awesome. It's like, where do you go from there? And then the kind of that's I joke, there's that guitarist Yngwie Malmsteen where he talks about how can less be more. More is more. That's like a famous quote of his, which it's really funny once you unpack it when you think about it. But the idea that you make these seismic, leaps not only popularity, but I mean in terms of what you're doing and then the impact it's having. So now instead of having 10,000 followers, you have 100,000, you have 200,000 followers. But you do these things, Eric, where like one of the magic tricks was I got stronger in a short period of time because I really found out about programming and like good environment, all that stuff, cool, whatever. I got more aesthetic, or more importantly, I found the good angles, right? So that's like one year after another, there's almost these like seismic leaps that are occurring. And so then the pressure for like the next magic trick to happen, whether I was aware of it or not, and like that's why it's kind of a minor story of Icarus. And what I mean when I say that, flying too close to the sun, in that, you know, we were at that inflection point, Eric, where the talent pool, and this is, I'm not trying to insult myself in the slightest, but the talent pool was a certain size as such that I could actually be competitive. Like I remember in 2013, entering now 2014, that my numbers that I was just lifting in the gym were comparable to the Canadian national record. And thus, like, you find all this stuff, Eric, I found out via like Johnny, like Candido, that, oh, you go to Worlds and you can compete at Worlds with these numbers. So now, like, I never in my head, I wasn't like, oh, I want it. Like, that's what people don't understand, is that it is kind of that iron sharpening iron, where I've always had some sort of physical discipline that kind of just centers me. Like I played a lot of sports growing up. I did track, all these things. I do like to compete against myself. So it's a way of just balancing, because otherwise in my, you know, personal life and some things I do, I like to keep it a little bit more open-ended in terms of the activities or a variety of other things, and not really have obligations. So having something that gives me structure and gives me kind of that foundation is very meaningful for me. But anyways, so you go then from creating this content, like going on your journey, you're just like having fun, like you're training, everything's going great, to now you have like kind of a specific goal. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, relative to participants in the space, I was a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of just a few of the lifts in the weight class, like, well, it doesn't matter. But anyways, what ended up happening, you mentioned something that's very important, like kind of like the Who Watches the Watchmen. It's the whole concept of stagnation. No one wants stale water. And what inevitably happens is that I became attached to this goal that wasn't really like a major goal of mine, and it wasn't, you know, to compete, but it was, you know, myself relative to the space, that I started pursuing more intensively. Obviously, strength training, that's not a bad thing. But some of the methodology that I chose, I would say, was of the short-sighted nature, which were designed for me to, you know, maximize my strength in a certain period of time because I have a certain goal that I have. But what ended up happening, and this is just, you know, how it occurred. I'm not trying to give this narrative like I did too much and then I got injured and like it would have happened. But like, you know, things started occurring to my body where what I was throwing at it, because I was more and more ambitious, my body couldn't handle. And then, at least in terms of my strength goals, Eric, I spent the next several years trying to just get back to where I was. So it was this constant kind of rat race of me building back up, being impatient with it, and being dissatisfied with where I was. That was never really there before. So as I became more ambitious, I took on more. And then because there's expectations both of myself, a little bit of my audience, it's not their fault whatsoever, but it's like, this is my pocket. Like this is, so now I've become known for this thing, right? And so now you have all these things intersecting with one another that weren't there before. Like when you're on this rise and you just go in, like I remember we temporarily, because like, so this is 2012, Eric, our house was being renovated. And so we actually moved just for, it's like a few weeks, to basically closer to the gym that I was going to. And Eric, literally, like you could relate to this, man. I would go for evening sessions, not because I had to. I implemented twice a day training simply because I wanted to. But fast forward then 3 years or 4 years later, I'd say briefly, so now 2015, 2016, more participants are entering it. I haven't made tangible progress, at least like in my own eyes, in terms of my training. That same enjoyment I was driving from it is now different because I have this expectation, and the emphasis is on an observable metric. And that's how I define whether or not what I'm doing is kind of worthwhile. So things without me, I'd say the carpet or the rug was swept from underneath me without me knowing it. And that's why I said it was insidious, man, because it changes you, whether you want to or not. When you participate in a space, it interacts with you, you interact with it. It will change you. And so I think what basically happened, we start with that phase 2 of now you're deriving income. The phase 2 point, the kind of like crisis part, I'm joking when I say it, is that now my motivations have changed. And now why I'm doing what I'm doing isn't really hitting. And so I'm kind of in this abyss where before my motivations why I want to do something would be enough to propel me forward. And so my actual, let's say, how much I would put into it was a lot higher. So now not only am I applying myself less, but I'm not getting the results I want. So you're kind of in this feedback loop.
Yeah. And I know, I think I'm fortunate that I am actually a competitor.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to, and it's not always a good thing. I'll give the other side to this double-edged sword in a moment. But when I have come into experiences like that, where it's that insidious loss of motivation and you're not sure what the next step is, and maybe it comes with, mental burnout or physical injury, it's a lot easier to set a goal when you're a competitor, because you go, all right, well, I'm going to compete. And it can, and like if you're good about it mentally, you can be like, I'm going to compete in 2 years, and that for me has always been sufficient to get me refocused again. Almost, I'm not gonna say instantly, but I start to like, okay, I'm gonna write down a plan. I'll call up, Berto and be like, hey, let's figure out, my next time I get on stage, or all right, let me figure out, let me write down how I'm gonna do this next powerlifting block, and I'm gonna see, okay, when's the next national competition, and what do I need to do to qualify that? Like there's this already constructed set of options for you to where you can channel that energy into to recreate a goal. And I think even more so when I have multiple outlets for competition, both strength and physique sport, I can go with the path of, I wouldn't even say least resistance, but most motivation.
Yeah.
Or sometimes least resistance, like, oh, I currently have an injury.
Yeah.
I guess I'm doing bodybuilding, like that type of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that has always been helpful. Now, to say what I was going to say, because this is a double-edged sword, I think sometimes you'll see competitors have a much larger issue than their motivation currently needing a little kick in the pants, and they try to like plaster over that hole, that is too big for plaster with, I'll just compete again.
Yeah.
It's actually a very common thing in bodybuilding. Is, people get into bodybuilding for many reasons, but it almost always has an element of having control. So they don't feel a certain level of control in their life, or maybe they don't feel relevant. So it's like, well, I'll just prep,
Yeah.
And sometimes that can literally just make everything worse, because at a certain point in prep, it's just very fatiguing. Getting lean is hard, and being restricted, and like, you know what I need while I'm down? Getting kicked. It's like, this is not what you need. But
Eric, at least I'm choosing to be kicked. You know what I'm saying? Now I'm choosing for myself.
I'm in control here. Yeah, exactly. I'm choosing not to pull this parachute. You're still gonna die. So yeah, it's absolutely like that. So I think I can definitely relate to what you've gone through, and I'm actually very curious as to what things you have done and what has worked for you at these various crucible moments that have enabled you to keep moving forward. Because I would say if we look at your overall career arc as a lifter, like everybody, you have plateaus, but unlike everyone, you have continued to have an upward arc, in the various different ways that you are seeking different goal attainment.
Yeah, I think, Eric, so a few things. It's interesting because when you have a problem, or when you're not getting the desired outcome, then you start thinking, okay, like what's actually going on here? And the two are tied together. Like I'd say the content that I had created, and I'm proud of all the content that has been created, there's a little bit, once again, stagnation going on there. A variety of different reasons. So redundancy, whereas before, like some of the things, like bringing on like either experts, or the type of content, or the like little skits, or like all those sorts of things, they all blend together. The point is, and when you're busy doing something, and I think that one of the worst things that can happen to anyone is that you could be, I'm joking when I say this, like moderately successful, and you could be doing something that rewards you, enough that you can once again derive income, because not that it doesn't give you the impetus to improve, but because it lulls you into a false sense of complacency over time, and that insight that you have where you bring something new. So you're separated from kind of the collective. You bring something new inside of it. You start innovating, and that gives energy, and that allows you then to keep innovating and moving forward and being creative and so forth, rather than being kind of one of the fixtures in the space. So a few things did happen at the same time, but just with part of my personality, it never lasts a long period of time. time either. So that when I had a few setbacks, I did switch, even though I was terrible at it, like weightlifting. It was, from a mental standpoint, it was very liberating. I had a great time. Just the change of it. And also when you look at the time course, so one of the best things I did, Eric, was that I eased my foot off the gas pedal, because if you take a look at the time course of a lot of lifters, the greatness takes, years or decades to actually achieve. And so my time course of what I was viewing for myself was way too narrow of a window, and it was limiting me in a variety of different ways. And so I started piecing up some of those goals. So during that time, before this, I'd say that's like renewed phase that I feel that I'm approaching, is that I did have so I came out, like I deadlifted that like 600 pounds. And then more recently during the pandemic, which we'll get you, like the overhead press PRs, the squat PR, it was high, but YOLO. But like some of those things that occurred is that I was able to figure it out, and I was able to do it in a way that it was comfortable, where I always like to think of things in terms of probabilities, because after having a few setbacks, it's like, well, I could try this method, but this method comes with it. Here are some of the potential hazards, not that it's going to occur, but here are some of the risks. What is going to get me there? So I expanded the time course, is what I'd say the first thing. And then what was great, like this is the joke, and this is the Icarus joke with it, Eric, is that the space in terms of competitive lifters had way passed me by that point. And so now this thing that I wasn't from the inception, and I don't mean that in a bad, like literally right now, if I look up the 83 kg like Canadian men's nationals in Canada, like I wouldn't place first. I think I could place like top 5. So it's not like terrible. It's not like stupendous, but it's something. So when I say pass me by, I mean that like from a, oh my God, I'm going to follow you because you're a lifter. And we spoke about that in 2022, which is inevitable. So any space needs innovation and needs novelty. Otherwise, stagnation will occur. And one of the things that, whether people want to admit it or not, when it comes to powerlifting, tested powerlifting, untested powerlifting, is the population increased every single year. More participants. We had more outliers, more PRs. Eventually, like just think about track and field. It's not like every single year the 100-meter race is being broken. Eventually, it's going to take years, then decades, and there'll be a further and further gap between those. Anyways, the point of me saying that, Eric, is that what happened for me, whether I was aware of it or not, it started affecting other aspects of what I did. And you don't put the same time and attention. Of course, there's other things like personal obligations outside of lifting, outside of my career, like all those things come together. Eventually, like one must grow up. And I think if I had to make one observation, Eric, that's funny to me, is that I joke when I say, and I'll say this, like in quotations, that not that lifting is a young man's game. When people say that, I think what they're actually hinting at, which is kind of true for a lot of people over their life, their time course of their life, their responsibilities increase. So like when so I was 18, okay, I was doing a double major. I had a full-time job. I had my transportation, or in order to get to the university, I took the bus, was 75 to 90 minutes there and back. So it was 3 hours out of my day. So it's like a job. Honestly, like school was fine, but it's double, like it requires a certain amount of study and all that stuff. Cool. And then also training, because I'm an idiot. I was training like 5 days a week. And that was fine. That was extremely manageable. And not only that, my obligations outside of that which I did, non-existent, right? As every year passes, I think it's just human nature, like more things, like, you get in relationships, like marriage, kids, or like whatever things, family, like whatever the case may be, is that you really do need, and one of the observations I've made, and I'll come back to that because I want to talk about pandemic, third phase, like some of the things that were done. But one of the things I observed is that a lot of the most successful lifters, not always, are those that control other aspects of their life so that they can excel in terms of what they want to do. And so understanding that it's okay, once again, if you reach a theoretical point, that what you're doing, I think it's nonsensical to think if you've plateaued, that what you're doing is going to be enough to move you forward. What got you there obviously won't be enough moving forward. So you're at the crucible, then you have to make the choice. It's like, okay, so why am I doing this? Like, do I want to do this once again to prove it to myself? Am I doing this like for my followers, or a variety of different reasons? And I think what was fortunate, and I do say this, man, is that what was fortunate, for me at least, the 2020 pandemic is like, oh God, he's going off on this thing again, like saying it's the best. But like, because you were forced to pause. And if it didn't occur, I kind of would have ended up, I think, just doing what I was doing, which would have been more or less the same, which again, it's not a bad thing, but it caused a seismic shift. So I could take kind of a tally of the last decade and see like, oh, what did I like? What didn't I like? Why are some of these things not working? And fundamentally, I would say that word fundamentally changed them. So it was forced upon me. But yeah, I would say I had some success like with lifting and so forth. But what I ultimately had envisioned, Eric, both in my content, the quality, or the style, like all the different constituent parts together, wasn't quite there, and then my lifting wasn't quite there. So I was at an impasse at that point.
Yep. And no, I totally agree. Like what you mean by the whole young man's game. The interesting thing is you were, I wouldn't say you were filled with responsibilities, but you didn't have a lot of spare time. Yeah. When you were doing a lot of lifting 5 days a week. And I think it's not that the young man has a ton of time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you don't typically have the same number of people depending upon you.
Right.
You don't have quite the same number of responsibilities. You're typically working a job that is fulfilling an immediate financial need to build the rest of your career. You may or may not be in school, or you could be in a a job that just pays the bills, or you could be in a apprenticeship. There's a lot of different pathways that people go in life, but more often than not, like you said, you have not built up to the point where you're like early on, the person you negotiate with to compromise is yourself. But later on, you would be forced to negotiate with your boss or your spouse or your significant others. Or your children, so it is a very different calculus. And like you said, figuring out what that looks like, or is, shout out to Brian Whitaker, figuring out how to optimize within those constraints I wouldn't say it gets harder per se, but it necessarily involves a more delicate balance, and what those constraints look like are not all completely self-imposed. So how to do that is, it can have an impact on relationships and other people beyond yourself. And I think that does make it much more challenging.
No, Eric, 100%. I think whether or not a younger individual has the same level of responsibility as when they get older, one thing that's absolutely true is that they have more time. So at the very least, the illusion of the openness of possibilities is open to them. Whereas like we could all hit PRs and so forth, but we spoke about that concept, Eric. Fundamentally, there will be a certain point in time where you will hit your last PR. So the window of possibilities is far more open. And I think that's liberating in and of itself for a younger lifter. So it kind of spurs you forward. I would say so. One of the biggest things for me, actually, the start, I'd say, of the phase 3 pandemic hit. You really don't know, and this is no shade. So I was very fortunate, Eric, where I was able to lift inside of a place. I will say this now because I'm pretty sure no inspector is going to shut it down. I was able to lift inside of a place that had with just a few individuals inside of a facility. So we had it basically to ourselves. But interestingly enough, Eric, I noticed this, and this is my motivation renewed, because now it felt like there's no pressure. So everything's shut down. When everything's shut down, then once again, it actually feels in a way like your freedom increases, because now, in terms of content obligations, not that there's any obligations. Like, again, I enjoyed what I did, but in terms of innovating, which is one of the things I like to do, or bringing something new to the table, or again, just that breath of fresh air, it wasn't there. That shut down. There's no obligation for that, because guess what? Worldwide pandemic, cool. So do you want to train? Yeah, I want to train. Oh, you can train, you can go there. Will you go there? Absolutely. And slowly but surely, like, my training quality actually increased significantly. And at the same time, I remember this, of the few people that had access to it, there are few participants, Eric, interestingly enough. Like, a lot of people say, man, an empty gym, I would kill for that. Well, let me say, folks, I observed 7 people that had access to that, and out of the 7 people who had access to it, 2 of them are only 2 out of the 7 of people that were regular gym goers remained diligent, consistent. I would say kept what they had or made progress. And I'd say, and that's look, it's a pandemic.
Does that include you?
God, so okay, I'd exclude myself.
It's 3.
Yeah,
so it's 3.
So it's 3 out of 8. That yeah. And this is a motivated cohort. Like that's kind of the interesting part about it. And again, it is a pandemic. There's financial insecurity. There's a lot of things going on.
Sure.
So please, I'm not trying to like the point of me saying that is not a shame. Anyone's like, you should have known better. But it's the point that I think
you should have broken the law and come to a facility and trained during lockdown.
Yeah. So that's the part that's funny is that so it wasn't that they couldn't train at the place, is that they could go there. They could they just chose their own motivations for whatever reason reveal themselves to themselves. And so they thought like, oh, I want to train, but now like you can't really post about it because guess what? You can't post online because you're training at a place that you're not supposed to be training at. You're known for doing like that's part of who you are. So now you basically just and keep in mind, folks, with the pandemic, I'm not trying to harp on this, but no one knew when the end was in sight. Like, but we could look back retrospectively once again, like, oh my God, like, wasn't that alarming? Like, whatever. But at that point in time, we had no end in sight. So it wasn't like, I'm going to get back, or I'm going to compete at end of mid 2020. It's like, no, like, it's shut down. Like, just cancel your plan. It's like, that was the safe thing. Okay.
Right.
So because there wasn't that, those people didn't train, and I was like, I wasn't thinking about like, oh wow, like I'm loving train. This is like, it's a renewal. Like I that's how I got back actually in MMA, because I would basically with my brother sit my ass down, watch a little bit of that Pride FC, so the old MMA, go lift, have an amazing lifting session, come back, and then just watch some more. And so it was the perfect kind of environment for all those things to occur. But at the same time, what I was going to say very quickly is that because, once again, I wasn't filming content, I was deriving some of my income from content, I had to come up with new sources of income. Long story short, some of the things, so I started placing a greater emphasis, guess what? Online store, Rascal, all those things. I would say financially from the years and years, and seeing that I could be a little bit more frugal with things. So at the time, that's I made the joke. I got leaner, Eric, because I'm like, bro, it's a pandemic. I don't know what's going to happen this year. How about we stop eating more food or just like buy certain things? So I started shopping obviously a lot less. I started eating things that were a little bit healthier because I was like, again, from the outset, I am in some ways not opposed to risk at all. In other ways, very risk adverse. So anyways, I made some financial choices that favored my body composition. I made some career choices that favored long-term outcomes. And as a direct result of that, and then when I took a look at things, I was like, wait, I've been working for a long period of time. I can actually like kind of make do with not a whole lot. I became more liberated in terms of me being beholden to just content in order to drive income. And that kind of set the stage for everything that I think is going to happen now in the future, in that I discovered that I liked lifting, or I rediscovered what I already knew, that I love lifting. And now, if phase one was proving to myself and proving to proving to others, I already accomplished that. Phase two was kind of deriving then kind of a part of who I am, and then what I earn from lifting. And then phase three, which is kind of wonderful now, is that I'm irrelevant. Which means that I could do whatever goal I want, and there is basically like there is upside. So the way I look at it, it's kind of like the perfect when they talk about like fat tails and distributions. There's no basically risk for me, only upside. Because guess what? If I'm irrelevant, doesn't really matter. If the content takes off or whatever, and it does, cool. I'm already doing what I like, so it doesn't really matter. But I've managed, I think, Eric, to effectively divorce myself from what I do as a lifter, and then obviously the income that I earn, or then the content I intend eventually to put back out. And I could say this, like, because I've been, and that's why we're talking about this now. And as someone, thank you for noticing the person, the training the shoulders, like, I'm back to training much more consistently. I had, Eric knows this, I was dealing with basically osteochondritis dissecans, maybe, so like a little bone spur in this elbow. So like I was actually training well during the pandemic. Everything was going great. Why I did take additional time from YouTube is that the elbow was just being real finicky, and I did have these goals in terms of the new content. Fun fact too, that Ancient Workouts with Omar did take off, and I took some time away from that because guess what? Spoiler, Eric. I prepared a season 2. I don't know if it's going to happen. Like, who knows? That's up to the gods, right? We'll see. But there was basically an additional 8 months or 6 months of me being away to let my body heal, but also because when you're presented with an opportunity like that with a lot of upside, you're kind of going for it. I do like to be singular in the focus, because it's tenuous. Like, is it going to happen again? Probably not. Is it going to go anywhere? Probably not. It's like, but I might as well take it. But it's set the scene where I've already filmed, Eric, 3 videos, full length videos. I've filmed 2 shorts. Everything's going to be edited. I'm coming back sometime in September, but it's a breeze. And I'm training. And the other thing too, just real quick, man, is that I'm training with a man, shout out to Walter. So my videographer, this is where you get with your people, Eric. You squat up, you know what I'm saying? You and I train, it's just a great environment. This dude's a 3-time national champion, competed at IPF Worlds 2 times, placed 4th place in 2018 in the 93 kg weight class. So I decided, I'm like, okay, I need someone in simpatico with myself. And I joked with you, Eric, that there's that film director who's interesting, Alexander Jodorowsky, where there's that documentary recently called Alexander Jodorowsky's Dune, where he spoke about the concept of some of the figures he wanted to work with, the sound tech, the cinematographer, whatever, in the film space. He wanted spiritual warriors. He said that was like his all-encompassing phrase. But like, you want people in simpatico with you. And so Walter has similar goals as me, way stronger than me, and he gets it. So if we film content, Eric, and I'm like, oh, we're doing a how to squat, buddy, this guy's a pro. Like, he knows exactly what I'm talking about, so he knows the shots. So it's a breeze. So I think it's been a reorientation and thus a reinvigoration of some of the fundamentals. And sometimes you need that necessary time away. So in summation, Eric, become irrelevant and then you're liberated.
I love it. It's the inversion. I dig it. What is there left to lose when you've lost everything?
Thank you.
And I'm just imagining Omar Isuf puts out the job prerequisites for being his cameraman must be a multiple-time Canadian national champ in the IPF. I think it's a good way to go. You're going to make sure that you've got that nice intersection. You're like, listen, if you are a camera person and you happen to be a national champ, boy, have I got an opportunity for you. That easy. Shout out to Walter.
Yeah. No, Eric, I do think what's so funny, he's someone, like, there's a lot of parallels. Well, I respect this guy because he has a full-time career. So he has an occupation. He's a very respected in our space coach. He does that on the side. He has his job. It's a good job. He's a lifter. He decided, so a few times, this is great, Eric, think about like this. So he has his full-time occupation. He's qualified for Worlds, I think, on 2 other. He decided not to go. Just find out. He's like, it's whatever. It's like most people. It's like, oh, like, from social media, it's a journey. Like, as soon as you're making a Worlds, that's content you can start talking about. And so, anyways, it's very interesting. I think separation is necessary to give yourself perspective, and because I was in the belly of the beast for too long, I can look. So there's 2 things. It's like, I am now an old hat in the space, meaning I've been in it for a decade, but I think you also have to approach things with a new mindset, and you got to avoid, once again, that stagnant water, where the thing I hate the most, the old man yelling at the clouds, is actually my least favorite thing. So you can see, like, even we've joked about TikTok. Like, I've joked a lot about TikTok, but hey, here are some positives as an example. I think more kids are sharing themselves, aspects of themselves. They have a easier access potentially to good, or let's just say information, like who knows if it's good or not, but it's shared. The rapidity of information is a different level because it's more bite-sized. So the smaller the size of the information, of course, we know this, right? So it's like you're taking now video content and you're shrinking it down. And YouTube now, Eric, is known as this like long form play. Eric's like thinking to himself, 10 minutes is long form content. Bro, that's War and in the modern times. That's Leo Tolstoy sitting down and writing War and Peace, right? So you see the space, and it gives you that fresh air. And I also think surrounding yourself with people like Walter, or also other lifters, like the goals that they have, and seeing what it provides for them, and understanding that journey, I think there's a lot to look forward to. One thing I think is clear, Eric, though, like yourself, is that I'm going to overall limit not my interaction with the space, but I spoke to you about that, man, about, like, again, the old dude at the powerlifting gym, just talking about things that you've already spoken about a million times before, where there's nothing new. And I think that's something, obviously, that I plan on avoiding. So it's good to have some fresh blood, I'd say.
So you're trying to maintain the spirit of irrelevancy to remain relevant.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. It's a little yin, it's a little yang, it's a little Rolling Stones, 1994. It's like, why are they still there? He looks emaciated. Is he okay? He's off pitch, but I mean, it is the Stones, so you kind of want to see them. I'm the nostalgia tour. That's what we're planning on doing. I remind them of a time and place of themselves, of where they were, and so I'm a vehicle for their nostalgia. Then they don't even care the content. They're like, oh my god, like this is objectively worse. But I kind of remember that time. Yeah.
This is terrible, and it makes me think of a time when things were good. Yeah. So no, it's kind of like the way cinema has been for the last 20 years. It's like, if we just remake everything, then we can keep the boomers happy. Yeah. So, and hell, Top Gun Maverick is getting ridiculous ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, and everyone's saying it's better than the first one, which literally prevents me from seeing it.
My guy. That's my guy.
Yeah.
We got to be contrarians in some capacity. You know what I'm saying?
No, I need to actually deprive myself of a good cinematic experience purely out of spite.
Yeah.
Because that makes me happier. And by that, I mean probably objectively less happy. So anyway, I want to circle back. So what you're saying is that on your YouTube channel, which still exists, we can expect content coming out literally in days, because you said September, and it, as we record this, is the 26th of October.
Oh God.
I mean, I can't. Wow, I got that way wrong. Is the 26th of August where I am, 25th where you are. So we're talking in weeks from when this drops, we're going to have Omar Isuf content. Is that what you're saying?
So I was trying to look at the date. So tentatively we've agreed. So I've been speaking with Walter. So it would be the 12th. Sorry. So we're the 25th of August. Because I'm being ambitious again. And I think that there's not a problem with that, Eric.
You've claimed a date. This is where you go. Yeah. When is season 2 of this show coming out? And they give you a date. And if it doesn't come out, you literally get the pitchfork and fire. Literally. Yeah. I get the pitchfork. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore.
I know what you're saying.
Pitchfork and fire out, and you kill those directors so that there'll never be a season 2.
Yes.
That's what I want you to do with Omar. Just he needs that accountability, folks. Yeah. He lives somewhere in Toronto, so I fully expect you just to start just burning down random homes in Toronto. And we did have that one comment where it seems like you're in a different room all the time. So I actually suspect that you are moving around just to protect yourself.
Bro. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why we just got to burn it all down. Hey. So folks, if you don't have in 2 weeks an Omar Isuf video, if you haven't been told to eat your effing vegetables, then you know what to do. And it is to destroy my favorite city in Canada.
Oh, so Eric, a few things. It's so funny. This is partially what I'm trying to do this time with myself and Walter. So it's going to be one video a week. So at my peak, I was releasing 5 to 6 videos. That's like unheard of, and that is something that I think would be untenable right now for me to do realistically, and also have that same mojo. But we're going to start one video a week. I want to have basically 5 or 6, so a mixture of long and short form content in the back burner, so we're ahead of schedule. How I used to, this is like, it's crazy thinking about this, Eric, because you know me, man. I'm the 11th hour man. I would film 5 or 6 videos a week. I would film them day of, edit, upload. There was never a backlog. My guy. So anyways, point is, and then we'll go from there. But what's really cool, I could say, and what is exciting, we'll see how it goes, is that I think we're building, as Walter and I have said, the war machine, like we're joking, that we could scale up without a lot of effort. And that's actually, Eric, this is the wonderful part. Like a lot of the tips, and I'm surprised. I'm going to say this now, and someone else is going to take the idea and just like crush it. It's not taking any idea, but I'm actually surprised, Eric, that no one, let's say on the knowledge side, as someone said, of fitness has taken bite-sized shorts. They do exist on YouTube, and people certainly do that. But let's say like practical tips. It's like a squat tip, right? How to like increase torso rigidity as we're talking. Like it doesn't really matter. But each is actually perfect for a 1-minute video because it's enough to really convey the information. You don't have to dance around the topic. Get in, get out. I'm actually surprised no one has people have blown up, and I can think of a few people due to shorts. And I'm not saying that to scale popularity, but I mean in terms of utility, where you just click on it. Like, let's say you're going to squat for the day, and like, you bend over when you squat, and you see a video that's a minute long, like how to avoid bending over in the squat. It's not going to fix everything, but it'll just give you that kernel. I'm actually surprised that people haven't reduced it down for the new generation,
Omar, I don't think you've realized that you're also spurring a new launching pad of growth for Iron Culture. Because for those who've been paying attention, we have stooped to reacting to other people's Instagram posts on Iron Culture.
Correct.
So now we can, believe it or not, I do describe this as a level up. Because as we described, YouTube is now War and Peace. I'm not sure what a YouTube short is. That's like the cliff notes for War and Peace.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we're leveling up from stealing other people's Instagram content for a podcast to just repurposing our own content from YouTube.
Hell yeah.
And by our own, I mean yours. So that there's less pressure on me to do the whole damn science thing. Because I tell you what, I'm running out of contacts. We've already talked about everything. So basically, if you're doing one video a week, and we do one podcast a week, we're golden, bro. So you don't need to do this whole 5 video a week thing. We have a plan, and I'm happy. So
Eric, man, I love it. What I would say maybe in closing, this is really full circle in the very literal sense, because what I'm going to do for my content, of course, is look back at some of your longer form content via Mass, because it is an absolute gold mine of really good information. And I actually mean that. So I will likely be adapting. My videos will be an adaptation of one or several of your Mass articles. And so then the video releases, and then we do a video which loses certainly inevitably because it's a 10-minute video. A lot of the fidelity, so it truncates the information, and there's maybe a little bit more noise because there's like skits in it, this and that. And so then we try and extrapolate from that bite-sized portion back out what you're saying from the article.
Yeah. So it's taking a high def image that was created 3 years ago, taking a screenshot of it, so it's much lower quality, and then what we do is just extend that and talk about it for half an hour. So then it's like zooming in on this now low def image, so it looks incredibly pixelated. I can't wait for it, because what we've got is Iron Culture podcast episodes that were directly based upon my Mass content from 2 years ago, getting dumbed down into Cliff Notes on YouTube, that we then discuss those Cliff Notes in Cliff Note form, but somehow managed to do it for 2 hours. So Iron Culture fans, you're in for a treat. This next era is going to be one to remember. And it's just going to be something that you would think, wow, why has no one done this? And then as soon as you hear an episode, you're like, oh, that's why no one's done this. This is a terrible idea. So, yeah.
Oh, Eric, the future is bright. Let me just say, I could feel it. I could sense it. Maybe it's me approaching the sun again, and so the wings are going to be burnt off. But I'm very optimistic nonetheless.
Just ask any mosquito. It's always a good idea to fly towards the light.
Yeah.
And I've never heard any mosquitoes say anything negative about it.
It's true.
I've also never met any mosquitoes that have, not done it yet. They're all, this is a plan of theirs in the future, but I'm sure it always goes well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Iron Culture, it's going to stay. We're adapting. It really is an upgrade when you think about it, though, because I was disappointing in us, Eric, stooping down or reading IG comments by other people, making videos about them without telling them, knowing that they're going to react, so then we could come back. I have several like Uno reverse cards in my back pocket for Iron Culture, and one of them is Sexual Health with Dr. Helms. That's more like I've said it literally from like the first episode. So no one, when it happens, the part that's amazing about all this banter and all these jokes, Eric, is that when something actually happens that we've lightly hinted at, joked about, laughed at, I'm like, why are you surprised?
Yeah, they sound like jokes, but really we're just trying to prepare you and set the ground and normalize what is objectively terrible things, that you accept them when we get into a multi-year period of just plateau of complacency. So any who folks, we will expect 5 stars explicitly and only during that phase. You need to help us get through those dark times so that there will be a true bright future rather than the false dawn of our incredibly pixelated lives. But yeah, no, Omar, I think this has been really cool. It'll be interesting what we decide to title this one. Maybe something like not losing your ID in the IG, or maybe something about, separating the life from the lifter, or I don't know. We'll figure it out. Yeah. But let me just say, I'm happy for you that both in terms of you as someone who is a participant in the space as a icon, but also just as someone who is connecting with the iron and figuring out what the next pathway forward for progressive overload is, that you seem to be on the right track. And I'm looking forward to Toronto not being burned to the ground, because I can't wait to see what you put out in mid-September.
Eric, let me say thank you so much. I think straight up, if we learned anything from this episode, we should just go for that there clicks and seller souls. So I think this one should probably be titled episode 187. We interview Arnold Schwarzenegger. We should just really, Eric, just go for broke here. We just like
you won't believe what Arnold Schwarzenegger had, and then just actually have his face on one side and us like.
Like, you just really go for it. And of course, everyone's going to be upset when they first click on it. I got clickbaited. But I'm confident if they manage to make it through the hour 25, they'll feel better after that.
Absolutely. I don't see anything going wrong.
Amazing. No, so I'll just say I want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of Iron Culture. As always, you can leave a rating and review. We do try and read them. Typically, people leave 5 stars. We're just letting you know that, because we're letting you know. We're merely informing you what it seems like most people do, but you are your own autonomous individual. You do you, boo-boo. And we'll see you every single Monday. We'll catch you on that next episode of Iron Culture.